Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is hatred. Why do they hate us? Why do they hate us so much? Those are questions Jews across the world have been wrestling with ever since October 7th and the massacre that Hamas perpetrated on Israel. The massacre and subsequent war, which should have turned a horrified world against these barbaric terrorists, instead turned into a massive Jew hatred fest. The show of support for Hamas across America and the United States and Europe has exploded, while support for Jews, the victims, is now low-key and, in many circles, very politically incorrect. As Jews know all too well, Jew hatred is not new. It's there. Often it's usually bubbling under the surface. Today, this Jew hatred is different. It's a different kind of Jew hatred. Before October 7th, 2023, an easy answer to explain Jew hatred was that the Jew hatred was a Christian religious hatred of the Jews. Plain and simple. The Jews killed Jesus and hence they were hated. But now that answer has no credence. In today's attacks against Jews, we rarely, if ever, encounter those old Christian tropes against Jews. Before, another common answer was jealousy. People who hated Jews were upset that the role Jews attained for themselves in society. They lashed out against Jews because they were jealous. Before, there were those who were simply racist also. They viewed Jews as interlopers and outsiders invading their host culture, and as racists, they were trying to protect their society from contamination and dilution by the Jews. The Jews were contaminating the purity and authenticity of their society. A few Jews, maybe that would be okay to them, but certainly not too many. These old responses, reasons for Jew hatred before October 7th, only partially answered today's questions, only partially. But history should never be ignored, and today it is even more worthy of our time to understand the origins of Jew hatred. In the 1870s, the science of racism arose. Those original racists developed a philosophy to protect society from the Jew. Their new science was based not on old religious stereotypes of the Jew. To this new racist, traditional Jew hatred was for the uneducated, uncultured, unrefined. They realized that their old hatred was antiquated and not worthy of the new German or the new Frenchman. A new form of hatred needed to be invented. A new word needed to be created. And so, in the late 1870s, people like Wilhelm Marr in Germany and Edward Drumont in France developed a new philosophy. It was Marr who coined the new term anti-Semite. They called themselves racists and anti-Semites. These were terms of pride, terms of ultranationalism. They were proud to be racists and anti-Semites. In the famous pamphlets that were spread this message, Marr's was called Victory of Judaism over Germandom, and Drumont's was called La France Juive, Judaize France. They made almost identical points. If the Jews are permitted to freely access society, it will change the nature of society. Germany will not be the same Germany anymore. France will not be the same France. This new form of hatred was created to protect the host society from external non-German, non-French influences, to protect them from the influences of the outsider. And that was, of course, the Jew. Today's hatred of the Jew is different. It is, quite frankly, a mishmash of the old and the new. It is an insult to anti-Semites of old. They at least had an ideology. Today's haters have only hate, a passionate fervor of hatred towards the Jew. Today, religious hatred of the Jew swaps Christian for Muslim hatred, which comes with a whole series of conspiracy theories about Israel and the Jews. This certainly explains Hamas, who we see murdering Jews as a Muslim obligation. And then there's the anti-Western and anti-colonial component that feeds into the total rejection of Israel. All Jews are lumped together with Israel as being a racist colonial power. For these Jew hatreds, Hamas represents all Palestinians and Israel represents all Jews. And that is why these new Jew haters side with Hamas, the terrorists, the mass murderers, the mass rapists, the kidnappers. That is how they can take the side of the terrorist, the mass murderer, over the victim or the person defending themselves. In their mind, often shaped by social media, Israel and Jews never had the right to be there in the first place. In their minds, they are entitled to Jew hate just as Hamas is entitled to mass murder, rape, and kidnap. And then there are those for whom hating the Jew and getting others to join their hatred is a form of Muslim religious observance. For Hamas, it is a religious obligation. That is why we hear the chant, Allahu Akbar, almost at every pro-Hamas, anti-Jewish rally. Post-October 7th, Jew hatred is here for the long haul. Stopping it requires a strong effort of re-education. It requires social media. It requires good people to enforce codes of conduct and laws punishing people who violate those codes. It requires accountability. The masses have forgotten that the right to freedom of speech is limited, especially when it comes to incitement. That's why they hate us so much. Coming up next, Points of View. First up is a column from Ynet, and it was published on January 4th, 2024. This column is entitled, Iran Gets a Taste of Its Own Medicine in Deadly Blast. Subtitled Opinion, Attack which ISIS claimed responsibility for, not likely the work of Israel. It's a huge embarrassment for the regime and potentially encourages opposition groups. The column is authored by U.S. Colonel retired Richard Kemp. With his column, Kemp tries to explain the double suicide bombing that took place in Iran. This is how he begins. The greatest terrorist regime in the world got on Wednesday what may seem like a taste of its own violent medicine with the most deadly attack inside Iran for 42 years. But it may be more complex than that. Dozens were killed and about twice that number wounded, some seriously by 2 explosions, 15 minutes apart, on the 4th anniversary of the assassination of master terrorist Qasem Soleimani. Kemp gives some background and explains that the earlier assassination of the Hamas leader, Salah al-Aruri, in Beirut, is significant in understanding what happened now in Iran. He continues, the day before, leaders of one of Iran's terrorist proxies, Hamas, perished in a drone strike in Beirut that is likely viewed as Israel's work, although Jerusalem has not commented. Some have suggested that Jerusalem may also have been responsible for the twin bombings in Kerman, close to Soleimani's tomb. Although Israel is currently under assault from Iran's proxies in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, this kind of attack is not in its playbook. Israeli operations inside Iran have focused on targeted killings of key individuals associated with the nuclear weapons program, as well as cyber attacks and sabotage at nuclear facilities. So who could be responsible? So far, ISIS has claimed responsibility, but no hard evidence has come to light, so we can only speculate. Potential culprits include a range of opposition groups in Iran, including the Mujahideen al-Khalaq, which has carried out terrorist attacks inside the country in the past, although these have generally been more targeted operations, not the kind of indiscriminate attack we saw at Kerman. Another possibility is the Islamic State or other Sunni extremist groups opposed to Shiite Iran, none of whom would balk at such mass carnage. Then there's Ukraine. Iran is a major weapons supplier to Russia, and many Ukrainian cities, as well as military forces, have been attacked using Iranian-supplied suicide drones. Kyiv has every reason for striking at the regime in Tehran, but like Israel, it's hardly likely to launch an attack of indiscriminate terrorism rather than a carefully targeted attack against military objectives. Now Kemp explains that far-fetched as it seems, Some people actually believe that Iran, the Iranian regime itself, is responsible. And whoever perpetrated the attacks, the fact remains that this was a serious embarrassment in Iran. Kemp continues, of course, this attack is a huge embarrassment for the regime and also potentially encourages opposition groups. We might therefore think they would not do it themselves, but it is not us doing the thinking, and the Ayatollahs might calculate things differently. That could include stepping up efforts to cut off the Red Sea with all that means for global trade, using both the Houthis and the IRGC Navy. We might think that in turn would trigger more decisive action by the US and its allies that could be severely damaging to Iran. But given Biden's somewhat irresolute response so far, both to attacks on the US, assets in Syria, Iraq, and to the Houthi action in the Red Sea, Tehran might well think otherwise. Kemp concludes by explaining that Iran will blame the US and Israel regardless of what happens. He writes, one thing is reasonably certain. We may never know for sure who actually carried out the attack at Kerman. Whatever the truth and whatever the motivation, the regime will publicly apportion blame to the party that best suits its own purposes, irrespective of reality. And that is likely to be Israel and the United States, at whom Raisi's fingers has already pointed. Meanwhile, the regime will make use of this bombing to take violent action against oppositionists, whether they did it or not. Next up is a column written by Ron Ben Ishai, also published in Ynet, appearing also on January 4th, 2024. The column is entitled, Hezbollah Won't Be Bothered with Arouri's Assassination. Hamas Will Seek Revenge. Subtitled, Commentary, Assassination Impacts Hamas Leaders Possibly Spurring Hostage Talks and Immunity Demand. Israel sees it aiding hostage release. Hezbollah's image and Nasrallah's deterrence are hit, but no harsh response is expected. That was the subtitle. Ron Ben Ishai is by far the greatest military analyst writing in Hebrew. Ynet in English brings his analysis to many non-Hebrew readers, which is a great service to readers and decision makers around the world, people who hang on every word written by Ron Ben Ishai. Ben Ishai begins, the assassination of Salah al-Arouri deals a severe blow to Hamas's ability to conduct operations against Israel in the West Bank, as well as to carry out rocket fire and attacks from southern Lebanon and Syria. Al-Arouri was the coordinator and initiator of terror and guerrilla warfare against Israel in these arenas since his release from Israeli prison March 2010. Over the 13 years since then, he accumulated political power and status within Hamas ranks thanks to his ability to initiate, provoke, and plan actions against Israel from the places he resided, such as Turkey, Syria, and Lebanon. Al-Arouri was expelled several times from these countries of refuge where he resided, but his murderous initiatives kept him in high regard in the organization. Recently, he was noted for his connections with Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, and he even made Hamas groups in the refugee camps of southern Lebanon around Tyre and Sidon available to the Lebanese terrorist organization. The expected scenario now is that following the assassination, these groups will fire at Israel. Indeed, Salah al-Arouri turned Hamas into a proxy for Hezbollah, with Nasrallah preferring not to confront Israel directly and instead having Hamas operatives do the work for him. This indeed occurred in several instances of rocket fire towards Israel from Lebanese territory in 2022 and 23. Ben Ishai explains why Hamas and Hezbollah are allies and what is happening in Lebanon. The column continues. It's important to remember that al-Arouri was a Sunni Muslim, while Hezbollah is a Shiite Muslim organization. Therefore, the close relations he forged with the leadership of Hezbollah and the fact that he turned his organization's operatives in Lebanon and Syria into proxies for Hezbollah gave him, according to the rules of engagement between the IDF and Hezbollah for the last 6 years, immunity from being targeted while residing in the military and political heart of the Lebanese organization. But, says Ben Ishai, as of October 7th, the rules changed, because now he's no longer under the protection of Hezbollah. He writes, however, after October 7th, the rules of the game changed, and al-Rouri, despite taking refuge in the shadows in the heart of Hezbollah's territory in Beirut, became a target. This was due to the actions he initiated against Israel, mainly in the West Bank, but also from Lebanese territory, and because his senior status in the Hamas organization, which Israel announced it intended to target its senior members wherever they are. The immediate result of al-Rouri's assassination will likely be a sense of persecution among the political leaders of Hamas who are currently in Qatar, including the head of the organization's political bureau, Ismail Haniyeh, for whom al-Rouri served as a deputy, Musa Abu Marzouk, who was replaced by al-Rouri, and other senior members of the organization residing outside of the Gaza Strip. Now Ben Ishai concludes by writing that while there are ramifications for the assassination, they are not what you or what one might think regarding this. He writes, Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza, probably won't be too distressed about al-Rouri's elimination, considering he was his bitter political rival competing for the organization's leadership. However, the assassination might impact Hamas's willingness to engage in a prisoner exchange deal. It's even possible that the political leadership of the organization residing in Qatar and also communicating with Egypt might press Sinwar to pursue a prisoner exchange deal, one of the terms of which could be immunity for the Hamas leadership from Israeli assassinations. The Hamas leadership might demand such a clause in a prisoner release deal, and Sinwar himself might have an interest in an immunity clause from assassination. This is an excellent analysis. Whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. But thank you, Ram Ben Ishai, because it's always insightful to read his material. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you two items today. First is a story about herring. Yes, herring. And the second item is a video of a soldier returning from Gaza after 88 days. An Israeli soldier with 9 other siblings, and how he is greeted. It is truly inspiring. This herring story has had many incarnations. It is what we call a genre story. That means that the theme is found in different times and in different places. I can remember this story being told several times during several other periods. The important point is that in Israel, soldiers are heroes. The story goes like this. On Friday, I had to jump to Jerusalem. My wife, she should be blessed, asked me to buy challah for Shabbat. I went to Mea Sharim, to the bakery I know. I bought chalot. When I left the bakery, I saw that they had a store that opened nearby. Herring. Maybe I'm not, but I'm curious. I entered wearing a tactical uniform and my weapon, and my eyes scanned the shelves loaded with fascinating types of herring. I recognized that it was good herring, and I picked one. Also liver. After consulting with the seller, I chose the herring, vegetables, and a kugel, and then went to pay. A guy entered the store, took out his credit card, and immediately announced, "I'm paying." There was an avrech, a yeshiva bacher, a yeshiva student, standing in the corner. He immediately cried out with a smile, "What? I want to pay." "You took the mitzvah from me." The seller, who seems to be a Hasidic man, living in the area across the counter, said, "You're all wrong. From the beginning, I didn't plan to take payment from the soldier." I left with the herring and with the story and with the love in my heart for this nation. How great it is that it is like this. Now, the inspiring short video of a soldier, brother, coming home after 88 days in Gaza and surprising his 9 siblings and his parents. The family spent every minute of those 88 days worrying about their chayal, their soldier. It's 27 seconds long, but it is inspiring. An important point of information is that all soldiers must turn in their phones when they enter Gaza. They may not enter Gaza with their cell phones. They are incommunicado the entire time until they come out. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Even Egyptians are shooting down drones. Egyptian air defense shot down a suspected drone off the Red Sea coast near the resort town of Dahab on Egypt's eastern Sinai coast. That information comes from two security sources. The security sources added that the drone's origin was unknown. Witnesses in Dahab said that they saw the object fall into the water, and then they saw another flying object fall in nearby the mountains. Americans, too, have been shooting down drones. A U.S. Navy destroyer shot down 14 drones coming from Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen. The U.S. Central Command announced on X, which is formerly Twitter, that, and I'm quoting here, in the early morning hours of December 16th, Sana time, the U.S. Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, the USS Carney, operating in the Red Sea, successfully engaged 14 unmanned aerial systems, UASs, launched as a drone wave from Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen. The UASs were assessed to be one-way attack drones and were shot down with no damage to the ships in the area or reported injuries. The regional Red Sea partners were alerted to the threat. Iraqi and Syrian pro-Iran militias, calling themselves the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, said that they are regularly attacking American military in Syria. British maritime security firm Ambray said that a Liberian-flagged bulk carrier had reportedly been boarded by armed individuals 500 yards southeast of Ayal, Somalia. 500 yards, that's half a kilometer. The vessel was destined for Khalifa bin Salman in Bahrain, according to Ambray's statement. The IDF in the Shin Bet said that Mamboudou Ben Lulu, Palestinian Islamic Jihad's head of military operations in northern Gaza, was killed in an IDF airstrike. According to the IDF, he was a central figure in the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, initiated and commanded on many attacks on Israel before and during this war. Israel's Division 4 soldiers eliminated terrorists in the northern and eastern brigades of Khan Yunis and destroyed a tunnel shaft leading to a vast underground compound where terrorists and the Nukba forces were staying. After the shaft was destroyed, 5 Nukba terrorists surrendered and later confessed that 2 company commanders and many Hamas personnel were killed in the tunnels before the IDF underground attacked. Despite the feeling by many Israelis that the operation in Khan Yunis is staggering, the IDF is focusing its efforts on finding senior Hamas officials hiding underground, which complicates the mission. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that dogs have been a major part of Israel's war effort? Dogs. Dogs play an indispensable role and have saved countless lives of IDF soldiers. This is the story of Mikey, an Alsatian German Shepherd badly wounded by a Hamas grenade.
They called us and said, "Hi, Professor Efrati, we have a dog that was injured. We want to treat her in the channel." I told them at the beginning, I said, "We are not treating dogs." And then they say, no, this is a special dog. It happens in Gaza. I said, okay, now we are listening.
Mikey, the Alsatian, was just weeks away from completing her military service when she was hit by a Hamas grenade and suffered catastrophic injuries in Gaza. The search and rescue dog in Israel's elite Oketz Special Forces unit suffered horrific wounds to her face, body and legs. Veterinary surgeons operated to remove an eye and treat shrapnel in her ears, pneumonia in her lungs and a broken leg, but the outlook was bleak. Damage sustained to her brain meant Mikey would never walk again, and it was feared she may not even live. But now, the 9-year-old Alsatian has made a miraculous recovery after becoming the first dog in the world to receive hyperbaric oxygen therapy.
She was exposed to a significant blast. She had injury in her eyes, in her leg, as you can see, and in the brain she also had remnant of the explosion in the brain. So when she came, she was non-responding. Actually, there was a threat to her life. That's how she came to the veterinary hospital, okay? And they called us and said, "Hi, Professor Efrati, we have a dog that was injured. We want to treat her in the channel." I told them at the beginning, I said, "We are not treating dogs." And then they say, no, this is a special dog. It happens in Gaza. I said, okay, now we are listening.
Since she was a puppy, Mikey had served with the Oketz unit, an independent canine special forces unit in the Israeli Defense Forces. It comprises of dogs that specialize in attacking, tracking, or sniffing out enemy munitions. Mikey was an explosives detonator dog who was sent in to scan buildings for traps before Israeli forces enter. She was working with her handler to root out Hamas deep in Gaza when a terrorist threw a grenade which blew up in her face. Mikey was evacuated by helicopter and rushed to a veterinary hospital on November the 12th. But after 2 weeks of traditional treatment, the vets ran out of options and her commanders called up Professor Efrati. He has pioneered the use of hyperbaric oxygen therapy to treat blast wounds in soldiers. It works by flooding the blood with oxygen, allowing it to bypass damaged blood vessels and induce stem cells to grow.
We are using the cutting-edge technology or the hyperbaric oxygen therapy protocol that we are using for soldiers with brain injuries. And this is the research that we are doing the last 20 years. And Mikey, she's improving significantly. As you saw her now, she can walk, okay? She can understand what's going on around. She can react, okay? And this is even better than what we have thought. And what's interesting in her case, I don't know if it will happen to additional dogs that we will treat. If we will treat, probably we will again, because the results are so amazing, is that it's like a fast forward with regard to the reaction to the treatment as what happened in humans.
Wow.
So for example, in each session that she gets, it's like 5 sessions in humans, the amazing progress that she made.
Mikey has made significant progress after just a few weeks of treatment, and it's hoped that she will continue to improve with a further 2 months of oxygen therapy. For Professor Efrati, her recovery is just as important as any other soldier that has served their country.
The best of the best treatment that we are giving to any soldier that is injured during the battlefield. Okay, that's the way we are in Israel. We want to give the best to our soldiers, and Mikey, she's one of our soldiers.
It's hard to imagine, but yes, medical technology helped Mikey, the dog, who saved many, many lives. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.